she fixed up some stuff on my stream. She made um, my transitions all different. She fixed some stuff. So I figured, I'm like, okay, well, since she went through the trouble of doing all of that, I would do a stream tonight. And since Victor, he went home, he has things to do, and it's like late o'clock at night. I'm like, it's not time for like a real stream to do like real things and stuff. Um, yeah, I figured since it's not really, the time to do like a real stream, I would just go ahead and read my book. It's fine. Although the next time I am gonna do like a stream, we just watched Batman: The Longest Halloween, the first part, and then we can watch the second part later, and we're gonna have some feelings about that. I also have some feelings about the Scarecrow, um, so that's coming soon. Also, not that that matters or that anybody cares, but I have feelings. So I'm hoping the sound is okay. There's like literally no way for me to know. I'm looking at it and it's looking like it's low, but I literally have no way to know. So hold on a second. Shit. Because like it doesn't matter, but I mean, if I'm gonna do it, I might as well make sure that it's doing it right. So hold on a sec. Let me just listen to myself real quick. Because I just want to make sure, because like I have it turned up. But I don't see the bar going very far. But then I'm not scrolling. All right, I'm just going to assume that it's working, and then, if I have to change something again later, I'll just fix it again later, I guess. All right, there's that. All right, well, I also picked up my laptop off of my bed, so hopefully this time there's not like the crinkling and crunching or whatever there was going on last time, so not that it matters. So I just want to read, honestly, and I said that I was going to do it, so I'm just going to do it. I'm going to take these off. Forgive my ugly eyes. I'm sorry, I know, but I can't read with my glasses on when I'm this close to my book, so just don't look at them. Nobody look at my eyes. So we have Battle Royale again, and hold on one second, because we have, and boom. Because again, we don't need my whole face, so here we go. All right, so I was on chapter 5. All right. I'll explain the rules, Sakamochi said, his voice again cheerful. Unlike the already dried blood of the teacher, Dragonfly, Hayashida Yoshitoki Koninobu's blood was fresh, the smell of it thick in the air. Shuyo couldn't see Fumio Fuyoshi's face from where he sat, she didn't seem to be bleeding much. As you all may already know, Sakamochi said, the rules are simple. Kill one another. That's it. No holds barred. Sakamochi beamed a smile, and only the sole survivor will be able to go home, and you'll even get a signed card from the great leader. Pretty cool, right? In his mind, Shuya spat. You all might think those are some harsh rules, but the unexpected will happen. That's what life is. Listen, if you're going to manage life's accidents, you need to keep a good grip on yourself. Think of this as practice for that. An exercise, okay? Also, in the name of gender equality, there will be no handicaps for the boys or girls. But I do have some good news for the girls. According to program's results, 49% of the past winners have been girls. If they can do it, so can you. You have nothing to fear. Sakamochi signaled for the camouflage trio, began carrying a large black nylon day packs from the hall. The backpacks soon formed a large pile beside Mr. Hayashida's body bag. Some of them bulged out at angles as if they might contain a pole-shaped object. One at a time you will each leave here, Sakamochi explained, but before you depart, you'll be given one of these bags, inside which you will find some food and water and a weapon. Every bag has a unique weapon. You see, as I said before, you all come into this with different capabilities, and this way we can just add a little factor of uncertainty. If that sounds confusing, let me put it another way. We're adding things into the experiment without knowing their effects. Now, we have not predetermined which of you will receive which weapon. As each of you leaves, we'll take one bag from the top and hand it to you. Also inside your pack will be a map of this island, a compass, and a watch. Raise your hand if you don't already have a watch. Nobody? Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you, we are on an island. It's just about 6 kilometers around. This is the island's first time as the venue for the program, but everybody is cleared out for us. There is no one else here. Sakamochi turned to the blackboard and took a stick of chalk. Next to where he had written his own name, he sketched a large, rounded diamond shape. Above it and to the right, he drew an upward-facing arrow and the letter N. Just to the right of the diamond's center, he made an X. With the chalk still pressed to the blackboard, he looked over his shoulder to speak. All right, this is the island's school. Got it? That's where we are. Sakamochi tapped the chalk against the X. I'll be staying here the whole time watching you. Next, he drew 4 spindle shapes, one in each cardinal direction. These are ships, Sakamochi said. They have the very important job of shooting anyone who tries to escape by sea. Now he drew several parallel vertical and horizontal lines across the island, making it look like a misshapen wire mesh grill. Sakamochi labeled each square, starting at the top left A1, then A2, and so on, continuing into the next row with B1 and then B2, and so forth. This is just a quick sketch, Sakamochi explained, but the map inside your pack is along the same lines. He sat down the chalk and clapped the dust from his hands. All right, so when you leave here, you'll be free to go where you please. But I will make announcements broadcast throughout the island at 12 and 6 day and night. That's 4 times a day. I'll be letting you know which zones, according to your maps, will be dangerous from what time. Take a good look at your maps. Refer to your compasses and the topography, and hurry away from those zones. And why is that, you ask? Sakamochi placed his hands on the lectern and looked around at the students' faces. That's right, the collar on each of your necks. Several of the students must not have yet noticed the collars because they touched their hands to their necks and looked startled. Those collars, Sakamochi said, are the result of the Republic's advanced technologies. Completely waterproof, shockproof. No, hey, stop. You can't take it off. It won't come off. And if you try to force it loose, Sakamochi winced. It'll explode. The students who had been fidgeting with their collars quickly dropped their hands. Grinning broadly, Sakamochi continued. Those collars monitor the electrical signals emitted from your heartbeat and inform the computers inside the school whether you're alive or dead. They also can identify your location on the island, which brings us back to the map. He gestured toward the blackboard with his right hand. Those same computers will be randomly determining the dangerous areas before I announce them to you. And if any of you stay in those zones past the determined time, just those of you still living, the dead ones won't matter. If you remain in one of the forbidden zones, the computers will automatically recognize it and will send a signal of their own back to your collar. And, Sakamochi said, giving a dramatic pause, though Shuya felt he knew what was coming, the collar will explode. Shuya had been right. Sakamochi stopped to gauge the student's expression. Then, after a short time, he said, but maybe you're wondering why we have that rule. Well, if everybody just found their own spot to hide, the game wouldn't progress. So we're going to make you move about. And then there are areas you can move in will shrink smaller and smaller. That's why. Sakamochi had called this a game. As despicable as it was, the word fit, and though nobody said a word, they all seemed to get the rules. I want to make sure you fully understand, Sakamochi said. Going inside a building won't help you. Neither will digging a hole. The signal will still reach you. Oh, and that reminds me. You're free to hide inside any of the buildings, but phones have all been disabled. You can't call your mom and dad. But in this battle alone, just as in life, although we start without any forbidden zones that would trigger your color's explosives, this school is an exception. 20 minutes after the last of you leaves, this will become a forbidden zone. So be sure to distance yourself from here first. Get 200 meters away. All right? And in each announcement, I'll read the names of the students who died over the previous 6 hours. Though the announcements will occur at regular 6-hour intervals, when there is only one student left, I will inform them by broadcast. Oh, and one more thing. There is a time limit. Did you hear me? A time limit. In the program, students die, but if there's ever a 24-hour period with no death, time's up, no matter how many are still alive. Shia saw that one coming too. The computers will do their thing, and all of the survivors' collars will explode. There will be no winner. Right again. Sakamochi stopped speaking and silence returned to the classroom. The smell of Yoshitoki Konanobu's blood remained heavy in the air, and the students still seemed in a daze. They were afraid, though unable to fully comprehend their situation, that they were about to be thrown into a killing game. Sakamochi sensed their collective mood, clapped his hands. Well, that's it for the tedious details. What I'm about to tell you next is more important. A bit of advice. Some of you might consider it preposterous to kill your own classmates, but don't you forget, the others, they're ready to kill. Shia wanted to scream. Bullshit! But Fumio Fuyoshi's execution for talking in class left him with no choice but to restrain himself. Everyone remained quiet, but something had changed, and Shuya saw it. The students were looking around, their eyes sweeping across the other pale faces. But whenever two gazes met, each hastily looked away to Sakamochi. This episode was only on for a few seconds, but even after it passed, the looks on their faces remained expressionless, taut with paranoia and fear. Expressions that wondered if the boy or girl beside them was ready to kill. Only Shinji Miyamura and a few others appeared calm. Shuya gritted his teeth. Damn it, he thought. That's just what these bastards want you to do. Come on, think, all of you. We're friends. There's no way we could kill each other. All right, then, Sakamochi said. Let's make sure you got the message. Inside your desks is a paper and pencil. Take them out. The students shifted uneasily in their seats and withdrew their paper and pencil. Shuya decided to go along with it for now. Okay, Sakamochi said. I want you to write this down. If you want to remember something, you have to write it down. They used the wrong right there. Sorry, I got distracted. They used the incorrect right. We will kill each other. Write it 3 times. Shuya heard the scratching of pencils taken to paper, and he could see Noriko gripping hers. Her expression remained grim. He started to scrawl down the insane mantra when halfway through his eyes flicked to Yoshitoki's corpse, and he recalled his friend's bright smile. Sakamochi continued, Okay, now write, if I don't kill, I'll be killed, 3 times. Once more, Shuya looked towards Fumio Fuyoshi's. Her pale fingers, poking out from the sleeves of her sailor fuku, had curled, forming a shallow cup. One of the school nurse's aides, Fumio, had been cool-headed and always there to lend a hand. Shuya looked up at Sakamochi. You bastard. I'm going to drive this pencil into your heart. 40 students remained. Chapter 6. All right, Sakamochi said. So you're going to leave this classroom one at a time at 2-minute intervals. If you go through the door and turn right, the exit will be down the hall. Loiter inside and you'll be shot and killed. Now, according to the rules of the program, we'll select one student to go first, and then the rest of you will go in the order of your seat numbers. Boy, girl, boy, girl. When we hit the end of the list, we'll loop back to the top. Shuya recalled that Noriko Nakagawa was number 15 on the girls' side. She's the same number as me. We'll leave at almost the same time, unless she's first, and then I'm last, that is. But can she even walk? Sakamochi withdrew an envelope from his breast pocket. The first student was randomly selected. The result is in this envelope. Just a moment now. Sakamochi took a pair of scissors tied with a pink ribbon. He had started ceremoniously cutting it open with the end of the envelope when Kazuyu Kiriyama spoke, the voice calm like Shinji Miyamura's, though. cold and commanding. When does the game begin? All of the students turned to look at the back row where Kiriyama sat, all except for Kawada, who just kept chewing on his gum. Sakamochi kept working with the scissors as he replied, "As soon as you leave. So you all might want to find someplace to hide and come up with your battle plans. It's nighttime anyway." Kiriyama didn't respond, but now Shuya finally knew it was 1 in the morning. No, make that nearly past 1 now. Sakamochi finished cutting the envelope, pulling out a white paper from within and unfolded it, his mouth rounded in surprise. One moment. Sorry about that. Sakamochi finished cutting the envelope, pulling out a white paper from within and unfolded it, his mouth rounded in surprise. What a coincidence! Boy's number! Akamatsu! Number 1! Sitting in the front row of the window aisle, or should I say the steel plate aisle, Yoshio Akamatsu looked stunned. At 180 centimeters and 90 kilograms, he was a big-bodied, but in the gym class, Yoshio did nothing but screw up. He couldn't catch a fly ball if it was coming right to him, nor could he even run a single lap around the track. His thick lips had drained of color. "Quickly now, Akamatsu," Sakamochi said. Yoshio grabbed the bag he'd packed for the school trip and unsteadily rose to his feet. The 3 camouflage soldiers' rifle held at their hips prompted him to take his day pack, and he did. The doorway opened into darkness, and he stood there, looking back at his classmates for a quick second, fear in his face. Then he was gone. The echo of the footsteps became a clomping run, fading into the distance. It sounded like he tripped and fell once before darting off again. As the room fell silent, several of the students let out pent-up sighs. "Okay, we'll wait 2 minutes. Next will be girl number 1, Mizuho Inada." This pattern of attendance call and departure went relentlessly on and on. But near the beginning, when number 4 of the girls, Sakura Ogawa, left, Shuya noticed something. Hers was the second desk behind him in the last row, and when she walked to the front of the class, she walked right by Shuya. He saw her touch her hand to the desk of her boyfriend, Kazuhiko Yamamoto, slipping him a scrap of paper. She must have left him some message on the sheet of paper she had used to write, "We will kill each other." Shuya might have been the only one who noticed. Sakamochi at least gave no sign he'd seen anything. Kazuhiko palmed the note and squeezed it tightly in his fist beneath his desk. Shuya felt a tiny bit of relief, knowing this madness had not yet completely consumed them all. The bonds of love preserved. She left the room and Shuya wondered, what did she write to him? He looked at the map on the blackboard. The name of one of those squares on the grid? A meeting place? That drawing is much too crude, and besides, there's no telling if it'll match the real map at all. Maybe a direction and a distance? But wait, if the 2 of them are going off to meet someplace in secret, that must mean they're convinced that one of us are out to kill them. That's just how Sakamochi wants us to think. Shuya thought. I don't know what's right outside, but surely I can wait there and talk to everybody who comes out after me. None of Sakamochi's rules would do anything to stop that. Surely everyone's gone paranoid and confused, but if I can talk to them rationally, I know we can all come up with a plan. And Noriko's the first one after me. Can she walk? Shinji's also after me. Too bad Sugimura will have to have already gone. Shuya tried to conceive of some way to get a note to Hiroki Sugimura, but the boy's seat was way too far off. Besides, if he screwed it up, he'd just become another Fujiyoshi. Soon came Hiroki's turn. As he was about to step through the open door, he glanced at Shuya and their eyes met, but that was all. Inside himself, Shuya sighed. He wondered if Hiroki was thinking the same thing and he would be waiting for him outside. He hoped Hiroki could pull aside some of the others. Ahead of Hiroki and after went the 3 who had remained quiet through all of the uproar. Shoga Kawada, Kiriyama, and Mitsuko Soma. Kawada had kept on chewing his gum as he departed. His expression remained calm, and he didn't give Sakamochi or the camouflage trio a single look. Kawada needs to get a new piece of gum. I'm sure that has no flavor left in it now. Kiriyama had also left quietly, as did Mitsuko. When Sakamochi had said the others are ready to kill, those 3 were likely the very first that Those three were likely the very first to be suspected by the others. They were the bad kids. Killing would be nothing to them if they ensured their survival. But Shuya thought Kiriyama, at the least, was different. Kiriyama had his boys, Hiroshi Koronada, Ryuhei Sasagawa, and Sho Tsukioka, and Mitsuru Numai. More than just some group who kind of got along, they had a real bond. The rules of this game might turn everyone else into enemies, but those five would never betray each other. When Kiriyama left, Shuya paid close attention to the cluster of followers seated around the desk. Curiously, their expressions lacked concern. Maybe Kiriyama had been able to pass a note to the others. Surely the five of them were planning to escape together. With Kiriyama, they'd be able to give the government the slip, though he wouldn't be trusting anyone outside his gang. Mutsuko Suma also had her group, but her seat left her separated from Hirono, Shimizu, and Yoshimi Yahagi, and she wouldn't have been able to pass them a message. Anyway, Mitsuko was a girl. No way she'd be playing this game. Impossible. Shogo Kawada alone gave Shuya pause. No one in the class associated themselves with Kawada. After he transferred in, he'd hardly even talked to any of his classmates, and so much of him remained an enigma. Never mind the rumors, but those scars covering his body. For a moment, Shuya began to doubt. Is Kawada going to be the one among us who will actually dive right in? No way. Or would he? There's at least a possibility, isn't there? Shuya quickly banished the thought, falling into mistrust and jumping at shadows that would be letting the government win. But in his heart, the whisper of a worry remained. Time passed. Many of the girls cried as they left, though to Shuya it felt like not much time had passed at all. He reckoned it had been nearly 1 hour, minus Yoshitoki Konobu's 2 minutes, when girl 14, Mayumi Tendo, vanished out the door, and Sakamochi said, "Boys number 15. Boy number 15, Shuya Nanahara. Shuya picked up his duffel bag and stood. He tried to think of anything he could do before leaving the room. Instead of walking straight for the door, he headed left. Noriko turned her head and watched him approaching her. "Nanahara," Sakamochi said, flourishing his knife. "You're going the wrong way." Shuya stopped. The 3 soldiers had put their hands to their weapon. He went to speak, but he felt his throat stiffen. He had to force out the words. "Yoshitoki Koninobu was my friend. At least let me close his eyes. Accord the dead every courtesy. Isn't that what the leader wrote in his analectics?" For an instant, Sakamochi looked unsure, but in the end he chuckled, lowered his knife, and said, "All right, that's very kind, Nanahara." She let out a small breath and resumed walking. When he reached Yoshitoki's body on the floor directly in front of Noriko's desk, he stopped. Though he had said he was going to close Yoshitoki's eyes, he couldn't help but freeze. The boy's skull had burst open just above the ear, caused by the insincere soldier's violent confirmation of the kill. His short hair was matted with blood, and up close now Shuya could see a thin layer of tissue had something white. Skull. When the bullet ate its way into his boy's head, it had made his eyes bulge out even more than usual. Yoshitoki's eyes were vacant and pointed upward in their sockets, like those of a starving refugee receiving his food ration. A pink mixture of blood and spittle oozed from the crack of his open mouth, and dark blood trickled from his nose, the liquids lazily flowing into the being absorbed by the vast sea of blood that had escaped his chest. An awful sight. Shuya lowered his bag and crouched down. Yoshitoki had slumped forward, and Shuya sat him back up. The boy's uniform was torn in 3 places on the chest and stained dark red, and when Shuya lifted him up, blood gushed out and splayed onto the floor. The body felt enervated and incredibly light, probably because all of the blood that had drained out. With Yoshitoki's corpse in his arms, Shuya's mind became icily clear, with his sadness and fear overcome by rage. "Yoshitoki, I will avenge you. I'll do it, I promise." He hadn't much time. Using his palm, Shuya wiped his blood from his friend's face and gently closed his eyelids. He laid Yoshitoki back down and folded the boy's arms atop his chest. Then, taking some time to gather up his bags, Shuya turned his mouth to Noriko and whispered quickly, "Can you walk?" That was enough to send the 3 soldiers' hands back to their sidearms, but Shuya caught Noriko's nod. He faced Sakamochi and the 3 soldiers, but with his hand lowered, where only she could see, he made a fist and jabbed his thumb toward the door. I'll be waiting for you. I'll wait for you outside. Shuya couldn't see Noriko, but out of the corner of his eye, he thought he caught Shinji Miyamura seated across from Yoshitoki's empty chair, still looking straight ahead with his arms folded, forming a smile at the corner of his mouth. Maybe he had noticed Shuya's gesture. The thought helped Shuya pull himself together. He's Miyamura. If we have Miyamura, we just might be able to escape. But Shinji Miyamura might have been more fully aware of their situation. His smile might have been a goodbye. But for now, the possibility didn't occur to Shuya. Shuya continued walking up the aisle, but before he collected his day pack, he thought for a moment, then went to Fumuya Fuyoshi's body and closed her eyes as well. He wanted to pull the knife out of her forehead, but decided not to. The instant he stepped through the doorway, part of him wished he had. 40 students remained. Chapter 7. Hold on. I think I only have ice in here now. Well, fucking Christ. Is my bouncy ball cool? Wait, hold on. What was that? Alright, just making sure it's all working. Good. Chapter 7. The hallway was unlit, save for the light from the doorway shining onto the wooden floor. The classroom windows, like those on the outside wall, had been covered by black metal panels, possibly to provide protection from any students who, like Shuya, were determined to escape and attempted to assault Sakamochi's location. Whatever the case, none of them were able to get near once they left, and the school became the forbidden zone. To the right, Shuya saw a door to an identical adjacent classroom, and farther down, another. Beyond that double doors, the exit perhaps, stood open into darkness. To the left, the hallway dead end with another room. Was it the faculty room for this small, remote school? The door was open and the lights were on. Alert soldiers sat at cheap folding chairs, fidgeting in the metal folding chairs. Were there 20 of them, or 30? No, there were more. One man for each student in ninth grade Class B. She had been considering that if his day pack contained a gun, which was a possibility, the program news reported always included the number of deaths by firearms alongside the death by blades and death by strangulation. Or if any of the students waiting outside had one, they could storm Sakamochi and his guards before everyone had left, before the school became one of the forbidden zones. But now, all such hopes were dashed. The three with Sakamochi weren't the only soldiers around. It seemed obvious now that he knew it. One of the men turned his head to glance across his teacup at Shuya. Like the trio in the classroom, this soldier wore an expression that was oddly blank. She quickly turned to his head on his heels and hurried to the exit. An impatient frustration occupied his thoughts. Well, all that's left to think about now is the meet-up with everyone else. But what if the soldiers are waiting outside to prevent anyone from sticking around until the next of us comes? She left the dark hallway, through the double doors of the exit, and descended a small staircase of 3 or 4 steps. The schoolyard was a desolate, moonlit space the size of 3 tennis courts. Woods lay beyond it, and a small mountain loomed to the left, while the right opened into inky darkness like the sea. Tiny points of light dotted the distance, land probably. The program was always held in the same prefecture as its chosen junior high. The location varied. She had heard of a few, including a mountain surrounded by high-voltage fences and prisons slated for demolition. But in Kagawa Prefecture, islands were the norm. A local news invariable revealed, though only after each program had ended. Sakamochi hadn't given the island's name, but Shuya thought that he might be able to recognize its shape once he got a look at the map. A sign on one of the buildings might even reveal the name. A light breeze bore the smell of the sea. The night was cold for May, though not unbearable, at least not as long as he was careful not to let the chill sap his body of too much strength in his sleep. But first things first. No one was around. No soldiers, nor any of the classmates as he had hoped to find. Everyone had taken Sakamochi's advice and hidden themselves. Even Hiroki Sugimura had gone. Only the salty breeze crossed the playground dirt. Shit. Shuya scowled. Once they scattered, they would be playing right into the government's hands. If any of them managed to meet up with their close friends and form a group, like Sakura Agawa and Kazuhiko Yamamoto or Kiriyama's gang, then some hope remained, but if they all hid alone and stumbled upon each other one by one, anything could happen in this resulting confusion. And wasn't that confusing an essential element of the game? Okay then, I, at least, will then wait for the rest, starting with Noriko Nakagawa. Shuya turned around for a quick look into the darkness back inside the school. Sakamochi had said, if you loiter in the hallway, you'll be shot and killed. But none of the soldiers at the end of the hallway seemed to be paying particular attention to Shuya's direction. None even chatting the mean were simply sorry, not even chatting, the men were simply sitting around with weapons not at the ready. Shuya licked his lips and decided it would be a good idea to step away from the doors. He turned back around. That was when he noticed it. Before, he had been too preoccupied with the scenery to notice the object at his feet. It looked like a garbage bag. At first, he thought someone might have dropped their day pack, but soon his eyes widened. It wasn't a garbage bag, and it wasn't anyone's day pack. One end had hair. Human hair. A person. Wearing a girl's sailor school uniform. She was face down and curled into a fetal position, but she recognized the single braid and the wide ribbon that tied to it. How could he not? He had just watched her from behind when she left the classroom 3 minutes before. She was still, with not even a twitch. Girl number 14, Mayumi Tendo. From the back of her sailor fuku, besides the lobster tail of her braid, a dull metallic pole stuck out at the angle like a radio antenna 20 centimeters long. 4 tiny objects resembling the tail of a fighter plane were affixed at the end. What? What is that? Instead of immediately seeking cover, as he should have done, Shuya froze in astonishment. Sakamochi's answer to Kiriyama's question echoed in his mind. When does this game begin? As soon as you leave here. Had someone really done this? Did someone return and do this to Mayumi Tendo the moment she left? Shuya hurriedly cowered and glanced around. Whatever the reason, the attacker was nowhere to be seen. No arrow had flown at him during the momentary distraction. Had the killer fled, satisfied once he took out this lone girl? Or was there some kind of false flag tactic done by those soldiers at the end of the hallway to convince the others that some of their classmates had already started playing the game? That didn't sound quite right. She realized that Mayumi Tendo might not be dead yet. She might be seriously wounded or just unconscious. He should check her at least. She was about to step forward. He would have found a swift exit from the game had he not sensed something and stopped. A whizzing sound split the air and a silver object flashed past his eyes downward from above. A new antenna sprouted from the ground. She was shaking. If he hadn't waited for Noriko at the doorway, he would already be dead. The attacker was on the roof. She pinched his lips and plucked the arrow from the dirt, then sprinted to his right. He moved without thought, only hoping that it was in a direction the shooter hadn't anticipated. He spun and looked up. On the gabled roof of the one-story school, a black silhouette loomed across the pale moonlit sky. Is that Sho? He had no time to think. The shadow turned its aim on him. Shuya launched the arrow at the figure. He had only hoped to startle the attacker and buy some time. But the arrow moved incredibly fast and traced a graceful arc across straight at the shadow. Had anyone other than the ace shortstop Shuya attempted it, events might not have gone differently. The figure grunted, brought its hands to its face, and bent over. Then it began to sway and fell. She recoiled back a step and watched the figure slowly tumble down in more than 3-meter drop before thudding to the earth, the weapons clattering alongside. Light spilling from the school entrance revealed the large, uniformed figure keel over to the ground. He was Yoshio Akamatsu, the first to leave, who had left so terrified he was completely still, unconscious, or worse. Lying at his fingertips was some combination of a rifle and a bow, a kind of crossbow, maybe. Yoshio's day pack had fallen by his feet, half open, a bundle of silverish bolts visible inside. She felt the blood drain from his face. He started it. He really did! Yoshio Akamatsu started the game. He got his weapon, came back, and killed Mayumi Tendo? He sensed someone approaching from behind. He spun to see Noriko Nakagawa, who gasped at the scene before her. Shuya's eyes fell back to Mayumi Tendo and dashed to her side and touched his hand to her neck. She was dead. She really was dead. His mind was a spooled fuse, and he felt it burn. What if there were others who were thinking like Yoshio? When they came back, what if they had guns? His perspective on the game had been forcibly altered. This is how it is. This is what Sakamochi meant. As soon as you leave here.
Shia sprang to his feet, ran to Noriko, took her by the hand, and said, "Run! Run as fast as you can!" He ran, tugging alongside the injured girl, but which way to go? He didn't have time to think this through. For now, he ran for the woods. Shia thought, we could wait behind that tree and. But he had to dismiss the idea. In her current state, Noriko couldn't stand a chance if anyone should attack. Nothing would be more dangerous than to remain anywhere near that school. Any thoughts of waiting outside the building for his classmates had vanished. He rushed Noriko into the woods with the trees mixed with bushes and a carpet of ferns. Shia turned, thinking to shout some warning in the direction of the school where 11 of his classmates remained. With 21 pairs of boys and girls, 12 more should have come after Shia and Noriko, but Fumio Fuyashia had made it 11. He discarded the idea. The others aren't stupid. They're not stupid like me. They'll run for their lives the instant they step out of those doors. Besides, Mayumi Tendo's corpse is waiting for them, too. Shia convinced himself he was right. For a moment he thought of Shinji Miyamura's face, but he dashed the image from his mind. He forced himself to believe that they would be able to meet. He would find a way later. But for now, he didn't want to spend 1 second longer near that school. Holding Noriko Nakagawa's tight, he continued haphazardly through the bush. A nearby bird cried and flapped its wings into flight. He didn't see it. He hadn't had the time to watch anyway. 39 students remained. Yoshio Akamatsu regained consciousness almost immediately, but after blacking out from a terrible blow to the head, he felt like he was coming out of a deep slumber. Pause. This is always really funny to me whenever they do this. So, like, I don't mind it, but Shuya's been the narrator for the past 7 chapters, and it's only been in his perspective for 7 chapters. Now we're bouncing to another perspective. That's just really interesting because, like, you're like, oh, this is going to be a book completely from Shuya's perspective, and then it's like, haha, just kidding. No, it's not. It's going to be from someone else's perspective as well. And I know that it's going to do that a couple of times because, like, I just know that the way that the story is told, like, we're going to have to see it from someone else's perspective as well. But I'm just saying, like, I thought that was really interesting as well. So I just wanted to double check and make sure everything was working as well. You know what? Yeah, hold on a sec. I'm going to be right back. I just need some water. I only had ice in there and I need water. Hold on a sec. came on too soon. I should have just eaten this really quick and then come back, but I don't care. I just needed a little chocolate. Okay. Chapter 8. Yoshio Akamatsu regained consciousness almost immediately, but after blacking out from a terrible blow to the head, he felt like he was coming out of a deep slumber. The first thing he noticed was the incredible pain. He was in a daze. What happened? Did I stay up too late playing video games last night? So was yesterday Saturday or even Sunday? Is it Monday now? I have to go. I have to get to school. What time is it? It's still dark out. Maybe I can sleep a little more. Shit. What's in my eye? The sky and the ground were sideways, and before him he saw an empty dirt field, and beyond it the curved bow-like shape of a mountain darker than the night sky. Suddenly, everything came back. Meeting Sakamochi, seeing Mr. Hayashida's corpse, leaving the room, taking cover in the shack, and finding the crossbow inside his day pack, returning to the school, watching Takako Chigusa, her girl number 13, her face harsh yet beautiful and then tense, and as she was sprinting away, carried by those ace-track runner legs, desperately climbing the narrow steel ladder on the side of the school to get to the roof, loading the first arrow as quickly as possible, but too slow. And Sho Tsukikoka, boy 14, was getting away, and then he turned his head and saw a girl lying there in her sailor fuku. To no great surprise to himself, the flood of memories had been accompanied not by guilt over killing his classmate, but by terror. For inside him, terror was a giant billboard rising in a wasteland, and on it, his classmates armed with axes and pistols and all kinds of weapons jumped out at him like in a 3D movie with the tagline, "I'll kill you," written in blood. He was under no illusion that killing his classmates wasn't wrong, and maybe it was foolish to even try to survive when every one of them would die once the game's time expired. But there was only logic. Yoshio didn't want to die. He feared his classmates because he thought they would turn on him. You have to understand, these killers are prowling all around. The decision to pick off his would-be enemies in the most efficient way possible had not arisen from a conscious decision, but from somewhere deeper, from the primal fear of death. This wasn't a matter of determining friend from foe. All were foes. When someone like Ryuhei Sasagawa bullied him, hadn't the others only looked away? Yoshio scrambled to his feet. First things first, he needed to deal with Shuya Nanahara. Where is he anyway? My crossbow. My crossbow. I need to pick up my crossbow. Where is my crossbow? Suddenly, something like a club struck him from the back of the neck. Yoshio lurched forward and fell. His body twisted into a V, and his face raked against the moist earth. The skin scraped off his forehead and cheek didn't bother him. By the time he had fallen, he was already dead. Sticking out of the back of his neck was a silverish bolt, just like the one he had put into Mayumi Tendo. 38 students remained. Kazushi Nida, boy number 16, had emerged from the school 2 minutes after Noriko Nakagawa. He stood now frozen in place, trembling. The crossbow next to Yoshio Akamatsu's body had been loaded, and Kazushi picked it up without intending to use it. But when Yoshio had stood, Kazushi's fingers squeezed the trigger reflexively. Kazushi tried to move the clouded mind into action. That's right, he thought. I have to get away from here. That's the first thing. That's what I should have done in the first place, instead of paying any attention to Yoshio Akamatsu or Mayumi Tendo. I need to get out of here. See, Yoshio is clearly the one who killed Mayumi, so I didn't do anything wrong. Kazushi was very good at making excuses, and doing so stirred sense back into his part on his numb brain. He lowered the crossbow and scooped up Yoshio's day pack with it and bundled bolts nearly without a thought. He started to move on, but stopped and picked up Mayumi's bag as well. Then he ran. 38 students remained. May I just say, Kazushi is not stupid. He has 3 day packs now, which is what Shuya should have done. And I know he was just trying to get Noriko out of there, which I understand. And he was scared, and you can't really say what you would do in that situation unless you're in it, because you got your fight or flight. You have a lot going on. However, my first thought when he walked out of there was to pick up Mayumi Tendo's bag. Like literally, that's what the thought that ran through my head was, because she don't need it. I want her bag. I want what's in it. There's food, water, and all kinds of like stuff in it. I want that. I need to figure out how to live. I want to survive. Give me your shit. You're dead. You don't need it. I want everything that's on you. Shit, I would take the clothes off your back if I needed it. Like in this situation. Obviously not in like a real situation. You don't rob the dead, but like this is not that kind of situation. This is the kind of situation where I would rob you blind. Take anything that might be useful. Sorry, I'm kind of bloodthirsty in this way. I need it. You don't need it, you're dead. Chapter number 10. They had been running for what seemed like 10 minutes. With the arm he had around her, Shuya noticed Noriko to stop. Faint moonlight filtered through the treetops. She looked up at him. Their ragged, heavy breathing seemed an overwhelming wall of sound, but Shuya tried to listen past the walls for any noises concealed in the surrounding darkness. He heard no pursuing footsteps. Though too busy gasping for air to be able to let out a sigh of relief, he did feel a little reassured. He... Sorry, I thought there was something in my book. It felt like there was going to be something falling out. He had been carrying both of their bags over his right shoulder, and when he set them down, his muscles protested sharply. She was out of shape. Sure, his electric guitar was heavier than a bat, but he didn't spend the whole time swinging it. He put his hands on his thighs and took a rest. Shia prompted Noriko to sit and helped her down into the shadowy brush. He listened again for any sound around them, then sat beside her. The thick mass of leaves crunched faintly beneath him. He felt like they had run a long way, but heavily zigzagged through the undergrowth. They had likely gone off course on their way up the mountain. They may have been no more than a few hundred meters from the school. At least he couldn't see its artificial glow, whether it was because of the rolling mountainside or the folds of the trees between. She felt safe in this darker place. Coming this way had been a snap decision, but one assuredly safer than heading for the open seaside. He looked at Noriko and whispered, "You all right?" Softly, she said, "Yeah," and nodded. She wanted to remain sitting for a while, but he knew that wasn't an option. Instead, he opened his day pack. Behind what felt like a water bottle, his hands brushed against a long, thin, and firm object. Shia pulled it out. He felt a leather sheath and a leather-wrapped grip sticking out of it, a combat knife. Sakamochi had said a weapon would be inside. Was this it? He groped around and inside of the bag, but only felt a flashlight and what had been a bundle of bread rolls. Nothing else that seemed to be a weapon. Shia popped open a snap and withdrew the knife. He noted the length of the blade, 15 centimeters, and that it was in usable condition, before returning it to its sheath, which he then fastened, clasp open, around the belt of his school slacks. He undid the lowermost button of his slacks so he could reach the handle at a moment's notice. Pause. How do you know that it's 15 centimeters? Like, just by looking at it. How do you know that? I mean, maybe I'm stupid, and that's very possible. I'm not saying that it's not, but, like, I have blades, too. Like, this is not a blade. Like, this is just, like, a multi-tool. But, like, if I were to pull out my multi-tool, right, that has a blade on it, and I'm like... and I pull out my blade, are you going to tell me how many centimeters that is? Because I have no idea. I'm not going to be like, oh my god, that's like 3 centimeters, or like, oh my god, that's like, 2 centimeters, or I don't know. First of all, I don't know what centimeters. I don't know how that works. I do inches, and I don't even do those well. So, okay, can you close? Please and thank you. Yeah, I have my multi-tool, like, next to my bed, as if I'm going to have some kind of multi-tool emergency while I'm sleeping. I just want to know where it is, so I actually keep it here. It's got, like, a can opener, and, like, I don't... Whatever. I want to know where it is. It's got a flashlight. It's got all kinds of shit. Oh shit. Turn that off. No, no, turn off. Stop, stop, stop. Um, Sorry, that was just an aside. Like, when you see stuff like this in books, and they're just like, oh, it was 15 centimeters, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, from the author's point of view, you know how many centimeters it is. But you, as the character, like, you're just pulling this knife out and looking at it, and you're like, oh, it's 15 centimeters, and this and that. How do you know? Just guessing, or, like, do you actually know? Because I wouldn't know that. Like, just looking at a knife, I wouldn't know that. And, like, he knows, like, everybody's heights, too. Like, do you just know that? He's like, oh, boy 15 was 170 centimeters. And I'm like, how do you know? It's so weird. Sorry, that was just an aside. Unpause. Without asking permission, she pulled over Noriko's day pack and opened the zipper. Peeking into the girl's things was taboo, but it wasn't like she'd packed it herself. Inside, he found something useful. It was a stick about 40 centimeters long. Okay, again! About 40 centimeters long and curved into a V, wooden and firm and smooth to touch. Was this what a boomerang looked like? A throwing weapon of primitive hunters and warriors. An aboriginal village champion huntsman could send it flying through the air and bag a kangaroo. But what were kids supposed to do with this? She sighed and returned it to Noriko's bag. He had finally caught his breath and no longer sounded like an invalid wheezing on his deathbed. You want some water? She asked. Noriko nodded and said, just a little. He took the plastic bottle from his day pack, twisted open the lid, and sniffed at its contents. He poured a little of the liquid onto his hand and tested it with his tongue. He then took a sip, and when nothing unusual happened, he passed the container to Noriko. She took it and drank only a small mouthful. She must have understood how precious water might become over the coming days. The bottle had only held 1 liter, and only 2 provided to each student. Sakamochi had said the phone lines wouldn't work. But what about the water pipes? Pause. That was smart of him. And I'm proud of him for, like, testing the water first, because a lot of people would have just opened that water and, like, gulped it down. And I'm probably ashamed to say that I probably would have been one of them. Because, like, when I'm working out and I have to run, the first thing that I do when I'm done and I can't breathe, like, is just gulp down tons of water. So that probably would have been me. He was smart, though. That was a smart move. Like, if somebody gives you something and you don't know that person, you don't trust it. Never take shit from strangers. So he found the water in his bag, and he was smart to test that shit first. So well done. Unpause. She said, let me take a look at your leg. Noriko nodded and stretched out her right leg, unfolding it from under her skirt. Shuya took the flashlight from his day pack and, wrapping his palm around it to prevent light from spilling out too far, used it to get a look at the wound on her leg. It was on the outside of her calf, a vertical gash about 4 centimeters long and 1 centimeter deep. Blood was still trickling from the edges of the exposed pink flesh. She would need stitches. Shuya switched off his flashlight and pulled over not the day pack, but his own gym bag. He took out the flask of bourbon and 2 clean bandanas he'd packed for the school trip. Uncapping the flask, he said, this is going to hurt. I'm ready. When he tipped the flask and poured the bourbon to disinfect her wound, she let out a small gasp. He placed one of the folded bandanas directly over the gash, then spread open the other before refolding it into a long strip and wrapping it firmly around her calf. Not a proper bandage, but it would stop the bleeding for now. As he pulled the 2 loose ends tight and tied the bandana in place, Shuya muttered a curse. Softly, Noriko asked, thinking about Mr. Nobu? Shuya gritted his teeth. Him and Akimatsu and everyone. This sucks. This really sucks. While his hands worked the knot, Shuya studied her face until he had to look down again to finish the tie. She thanked him and pulled her leg back. Mayumi, Nori said. Did Akimatsu... Her voice trembled. He killed her, didn't he? Yeah. He was above the doorway. He fell when I threw the crossbow bolt at him. Thinking back to what happened, she realized that he'd left without dealing with Yoshio Akamatsu. At the time, he assumed the boy had been knocked out cold, but Akamatsu might quickly regain his senses. He could have climbed back up to the roof, crossbow in hand, and continued his slaughter. Was I too naive again? Should I have killed him and then and there? She held his watch up to the moonlight, then finally crafted old Model K, Hattori driver's watch, a gift like most of his possessions, with him living at the orphanage, read just past 2:40. Whatever had happened to Yoshio Akamatsu, nearly all of the students would have left the school by now, save for two or three. Shinji Miyamura would already be gone by now, at least. Shinya was already certain Shinji would never have let himself be killed by Akamatsu. Shinya shook his head, thinking himself a fool for still believing he could get his classmates to band together. I never thought he was that kind of guy, Shinya said, willing to kill himself. Willing to kill everyone just so he could survive. I mean, I understand the rules of the game. I just didn't think anybody would actually go along with it. I don't think, Noriko said, that's quite how it was. What? She looked into her face. Her expression was hard to read in the moonlight. It's like, you know how Akamatsu was such a timid boy. I think maybe he was scared. I know he was. You have no idea what's going to turn on you out here. I think Akamatsu was convinced that everyone was going to come after him. That had to be terrifying. He thought that if he didn't act, he'd be killed. As Noriko had done, Shuya leaned back against the tree trunk and stretched out his legs. He himself had seen the logic. Fear could turn a student into a killer, but he also thought that by nature the scared ones would just hide. Yet maybe it was the true that extreme terror could drive them into taking the initiative. Shuya asked, "You think so?" "Yeah." Noriko nodded. "Still, to not even give her a chance, that's awful." They remained silent for a time. Then a thought came to Shuya, and he said, "Do you think if he saw the two of us together, he wouldn't have attacked? With us together, that would prove we weren't participating." "Yeah, maybe." Shuya considered what he said. If indeed Akamatsu had merely been taken by paranoia, then... In that moment, Shuya thought, I thought some of the others were going along with this. That's why I ran. But maybe I was wrong. Killing your own classmates? Who could do a ridiculous thing like that? Then, shouldn't I have waited for the others, even if that meant I had to deal with Akamatsu? Either way, what's done is done. Even if I went back now, everyone will already have left. But was Noriko really right about Akamatsu? Had he simply been afraid? Shuya didn't know what to think anymore. "Noriko," she looked up. "What's your take on this?" he asked. "I was worried we'd be in danger of somebody else like Akamatsu, so I thought that whatever else we did, we had to get away from that school first. But if he was just afraid, I mean, do you really think anyone is going to play this game? I mean, I was hoping that if I could get everyone together, we could escape this damn game. What do you think?" "You mean everyone?" "Yeah." Noriko fell quiet. Gathering her pleated skirts, she pulled her knees to her chest. Then she said, "I must be a terrible girl." "What?" I could never do that. Maybe Yuki," she said, meaning Yuki Utsumi, the class leader, who they'd both known since elementary school. "And some of the other girls I'm always with. Them I could trust, I think. But not the others. No way. I couldn't be with them. Not at all. Don't you think that? I can't know exactly what Akamatsu was feeling, but I'm afraid of everyone else. I didn't realize it until now, but I don't really know anything about them or what kind of people they are, really. You can't see inside a person's heart. I don't really know anything else about them," she had said. That's right, she thought. What the hell do I know about the other kids? They're just people I happen to be with during the school day. She had suddenly found himself again wondering if some of his classmates were enemies. "And so I'd suspect them," Noriko said. "Even if they were with us, if I didn't really trust them, I'd suspect them. I'd suspect that they were trying to kill me." She sighed. As horrific as the game was, it was extremely well designed. In the end, he couldn't let any and all join up with them, not unless he was absolutely confident that they could be trusted. What if someone were to catch him off guard? It wouldn't be just him he'd be endangering, but Noriko as well. That the kids who'd left the school ahead of him had immediately vanished was natural. They were just being pragmatic. Shuya's thoughts were interrupted by his mind made a new connection. Wait a second, he said. Noriko's eyes flashed up to him. That means that just because we're together, that doesn't prove we don't mean harm. They might suspect that I'm planning and eventually kill you. Noriko nodded. That's right. And I'd be suspected too, the same way. With the two of us together, one of the others might not attack us, but if we were asked anyone to join us, I think they probably wouldn't. It would depend on who we asked. She gulped. Scary, isn't it? Terrifying. Maybe running from the schoolyard had been the right choice, after all. What mattered most to Shuya was getting Noriko Nakagawa, the girl Yoshitoki had loved, safely out of here, and right now, she was safely at his side. Shouldn't he have been satisfied with that? He had taken the safest approach, but, he said, I at least wanted Miyamura with us. He'd come up with some brilliant plan. You'd be fine with him, right, Noriko? Of course, she said with a nod. Given how much time she spent with Shuya at school, she'd had plenty of opportunities to talk with Shinji Miyamura. Shuya recalled how Shinji had stood Noriko up and signaled him to calm down. He realized that if Shinji hadn't done that, both he and Noriko may very well have remained frozen in place and had been shot, just like Yoshitoki. Noriko lowered her head, possibly having the same thoughts, remembering the events that had led him here, and whispered, Mr. Nobu, he's gone, isn't he? Quietly, as if he didn't quite believe it himself, she answered, Yeah, I guess so. The two were again silent for a time. They might have talked about memories of their friend, but this wasn't the time or place. Besides, what had happened to Yoshitoki weighed far too heavily on Shuya for superficial reminiscence. What should we do? He asked. From here. Noriko tightened her lips and tilted her head to the side in silent question. I was just thinking, he offered. Maybe we could find Miyamura or some of the others, the ones we feel we can trust. Noriko said, That's... But the word trailed into contemplation, and she never finished the sentence. Right, Shuya thought. Neither of us really knows how to find them, at least not for now. All Shuya could do was sigh. Between the branches overhead and the moonlit sky was dim and gray. Shuya felt he now understood what they meant by damned if you do, damned if you don't. If he didn't matter who joined up with the other two, he could simply have walked around and shouted, but that would have been an open invitation to any would-be opponents to come kill them. Shuya hoped that no such enemies were out there, but still he was afraid. The thought led to an idea, and Shuya turned to Noriko and asked, Weren't you afraid of me? What? You never worried that I might try to kill you? He couldn't see it very clearly in the moonlight, but he thought Noriko's eyes went wide. You would never do anything like that. Shuya thought about it a little, then said, But you said it before. You can't see inside a person's heart. She shook her head. I just know that you, of all people, would never do anything like that. Shuya looked at her straight on. He must have looked dazed. You know? Yeah, I know. Noriko said. She hesitated, but then continued. I've been watching you for so long. The sentiment probably deserved to be delivered with far more formality. And would it be asking for too much of a situation to at least be a tiny bit more romantic? She recalled the anonymous love letter written on pale blue stationery, but he'd found inside his desk on the day of April. As the former ace shortstop in Little League and the current self-proclaimed and occasionally acknowledged rock star of Shiroiwa Junior High, Shuya had received love letters before, but this one had made something of an impression on him, and he'd held on to it. He thought it was because he liked the poetic writing. Be it only a lie, be it only a dream, please turn back and look at me. Not a lie, not a dream, your smile that day. But may my lie, but maybe my dream, that it was sent my way. It won't be a lie, it won't be a dream on the day you call my name. Never a lie, never a dream that. Shuya had wondered if she had written the note. The handwriting was similar, and the poetic style would have fit. Had it really been her? Shuya briefly considered asking her about the letter, but decided not to. This wasn't the right time, and he had no right to bring it up since he was ultimately smitten by Kazumi Shintani, the girl who, to borrow from the pale blue love letter, would never turn to look at him. Not that girls, on the matter of love letters, were much concern anymore. What was important to him now was protecting the girl who Yoshitoki Koninobu had a crush on, not worrying about who might have a crush on him. Shuya thought back to Yoshitoki's bashful expression when he said, "Hey Shuya, I kinda got a crush." "Shuya," Noriko had asked him now, "aren't you afraid of me? No, I should really ask, why did you rescue me?" "Well," Shuya considered telling her about Yoshitoki. "My best friend was in love with you, so I have to help you. That's the way it is." He discarded the thought, though. That was a discussion best saved for another time, when they could really talk, if such a time ever came, that is. Instead, he told me, instead he told her, "You were hurt. How could I leave you like that? At the very least, I trust you. Hey, not trusting a cute girl like you would bring some very serious bad karma." The glimmer of a smile flashed across Noriko's face, and Shuya did his best to return it. Even in these dire circumstances, working his muscle into a grin made him feel a little more at ease. Then he said, "Well, I'm glad that we're together, even if it's only us two." Noriko nodded and said, "Yeah." But what were they supposed to do now? Shuya began repacking his bags. Even if their next move was to stop again to rest and think about things, they needed somewhere with good visibility. He remembered reminding himself that he had no idea where the others were planning, but he had to be careful. He needed to be realistic, even if he hated what that meant. He kept on the map, compass, and flashlight. The world's worst orienteering meat, he thought. I don't know what that word means. She asked, "Can you walk some more?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "Then let's keep moving a little longer. We'll find a place we can rest." 38 students remain. Oops. Yeah, I'm still going to go a little more. Hold on. Oh no, I wet it. Shit. It's alright, it'll dry. Sorry, I'm like sliding down, but it is what it is. Okay. Mitsuru Numai, boy number 17, carefully advanced from the tree to tree where the woods met the beach, moonlight, and narrow, with only a few dozen meters of sand until the water. Over his shoulders, he carried his personal gym bag along with the day pack he'd been given, and in his right hand, he clutched a small semi automatic pistol, a Walther PPK 9mm. The gun was one of the better weapons issued to participants. Most of the other weapons used in the program were imported on the cheap and in high volume from neutral countries not aligned with either the Republic or the American Empire. Mitsuru had seen a hobbyist replica version of the Walther and understood how to use it without having to read the included manual. He even knew he didn't need to cock the hammer before firing and had been able to load the firearm from the supplied box of ammunition. The weapon felt reassuring in his right hand, but something far more important was in his left, a compass. It was the same cheap tin model as she had received, but so far it had done the job. 40 minutes before Mitsuru left the classroom, his personal great leader, Kazuo Kiriyama, boy number 6, had handed him a note that read, "If this really is an island, I'll be waiting on the southern point." Of course, in this game, no one is your ally, but that's the rules. But the family, the Kiriyama family, had a real bond. When others labeled them as thugs, they didn't mind it. It only strengthened their ties. And Mitsuru, Numai, and Kiriyama shared an even more special connection. In a way, Mitsuru had made Kazuo Kiriyama who he was today. It was fairly sure about something that Shuya Nanahara and the rest of those typical kids would only have no way of knowing before junior high. Kazuo Kiriyama had been no delinquent. Sorry, hold on. Rearrange my pillows here. Mitsudo could remember clearly the day he had met Kazuo Kiriyama. It was a memory it was a memory so vivid he could never forget it if he tried. Ever since elementary school, Mitsudo had been a real bruiser, though as the school bully, his role was not that of a tyrant. To him, born to a family with no real worth and a poor student with no talents to speak of, fighting was the only way he could prove himself. He measured worth in toughness, a standard to which he held himself and never failed. Naturally, on his first day of junior high, Mitsuru did his best to subdue any would-be competitors. Bitches, to him. Coming in from other elementary schools, from what he saw in the kids he met in what amounted to the entertainment district of his town, he didn't have much to worry about. But there might have been some coming from the other schools who hadn't heard of him. One king was enough. That was how orders were preserved. Of course, he never thought of it in exactly those terms, but he understood how it worked. Sure enough, among his new classmates were a few bitches. After the entrance ceremony and the subsequent orientation back in the classroom, school was let out, and Mitsuru had finished up the last of them when it happened. In the secluded hallway outside of the art room, Mitsuru grabbed the kid by the lapels and shoved him against the wall. The boy was already bruised above the eye that was brimming with tears. He'd been no problem at all, just 2 punches, and it had been over. You got that? Mitsuru was saying. Don't you go acting like you're tougher than me. The kid was nodding his head. Okay, okay, okay. He was begging to be let free, but Mitsuru needed a promise first. I asked you if you got it. He lifted the boy up with one arm. Answer me. I'm the toughest in the school. You got it? Annoyed at the kid's lack of response, Mitsuru raised him higher still. That was when he felt his eyes upon his back. Mitsuru spun, suddenly released the boy and fell to the floor and took off running, though Mitsuru wasn't about to chase after him. There were 4 of them, all 4 taller than him. They surrounded him. Lapel pins on the stand-up collars of their sloppy uniforms announced that they were in 9th grade. With one glance, he knew exactly what they were. They were like him. Hey, kid, a pimply-faced one with a creepy grin. You shouldn't pick on the weak. Another with shoulder-length, auburn-dyed hair pursued his unusually thick lips and said, Naughty, naughty. A mocking, effeminate way he said it sent all 4 into roaring, deranged laughter. Hee hee hee. We'll have to teach you a lesson, the first one said. Oh, we must, lisped the second, and they all laughed again. Hee hee hee. Mitsuru tried to take the pimply teen by surprise with a front kick, but before he could, the one on the left swept his leg out from under him. Mitsuru fell flat on his ass, and the pimply one was right on him, kicking him in the face, knocking out one of his front teeth. It sucks. The back of his head slammed against the same wall he'd been holding the other kid against. He felt dizzy. The back of his head felt warm and wet. He got on his hands and knees to try to stand, but on the other, right kicked him in the stomach. Mitsuru groaned, then puked everything he had. He heard someone say, gross. Fuck, he thought, cowards. Bastards! I could take any of you one-on-one. He was helpless now. He had chosen this location to rough up the other kid because no one was around. No teachers were going to come. Then his wrist was being held onto the floor. One of them carefully curled Mitsuru's Oh, no! One of them carefully curled Mitsuru's index finger and pressed it beneath his leather shoe. For the first time in his life, Mitsuru felt total terror. They wouldn't. They wouldn't. They did. The foot pressed down. Mitsuru's finger audibly, sickeningly snapped. Ah, gross! Oh, I can hear it. Oh, I can hear it. Oh, I hate it. Sorry. I'm sorry. The one thing I do not like, the one thing that is just like completely gross is bones snapping. Oh, it's disgusting. Oh, it's like my one thing. Oh, it's yucky. Oh, it's yucky. I think it's because I've had bones break. Like, I broke my wrist and I've had my nose broken. Oh, it's disgusting. I've broken, like, had my shoulder pop out. Oh, it's so gross. Sorry. Continuing. It's disgusting. Yikes a million. Oh, yikes. Oh, okay. The foot pressed down and Mitsuru's finger audibly, sickeningly snapped. He shrieked. The pain was incredible, like he'd never experienced before. He heard more laughter. Hee hee hee. They're insane, Mitsuru thought. They're nothing like me. There's something wrong with their fucking minds. They prepared his middle finger. Ugh! Pride and everything be damned. He was ready to beg. Stop! He pleaded, but they ignored him. Another snap. Ugh! His middle finger was ruined. He screamed again. He heard one of them say, Now, how about another? That was when it happened. That was when the door to the art room slid wide open and a quiet voice said, Would you guys keep it down? At first, Mitsuru wondered if a teacher had been in the classroom, but a teacher would have intervened more quickly. And besides, the request would have been bizarre coming from one of the faculty. Still, pressed against the floor, Mitsudo turned his head to look. There stood a boy, not too tall but incredibly handsome. He was holding a paintbrush. Mitsudo had seen him at orientation. The boy was one of his classmates. He was from out of town, and no one knew who he was, but he was quiet and meek, and Mitsudo hadn't taken much notice of him. The boy had the refined looks of someone from a well-off family. He was certainly be no good at fighting, but he wasn't worth Mitsudo's time. But what the hell is he doing in the art room after the first day of school? Well, painting, of course, but that's kind of weird. Whatever the case, the pimply bully approached the boy, saying, "What was that, asshole?" He stood in front of the kid and repeated, "What was that, asshole? You some first year? What the fuck are you doing here, huh? You want to say that again?" He slapped the paintbrush from the younger boy's hand. Dark blue paint splattered across the floor. The boy slowly looked up to the older boy's pimply face. What happened next might seem obvious. Suffice it to say, the little kid beat up the four ninth graders, knocking them out cold. The boy approached Mitsuru and gazed up at him for the time before saying, "You should go to the hospital." And then he was gone, having glided back to the art room. Mitsuru remained sitting on the floor for a time, staring off at the four bodies in the stunned awe. The boy was something altogether different. Mitsuru felt like a novice boxer who, even granted a decade-long career, would likely never progress past six-round bouts, meeting the world champion for the first time. Mitsuru had seen a genius. Ever since Mitsuru served that boy, Kazuo Kiriyama, Mitsuru didn't seem to need to test him. Kiriyama simultaneously took on four guys who Mitsuru thought he could handle one at a time. And since one king was enough, anyone who wasn't the king had to serve better. He'd believed that for a long time. That's how it worked in the boys' manga, so he avidly read. Kazuo Kiriyama was a mystery. When Mitsuru asked him how he had learned to fight like that, he simply said, "I just learned." And he wouldn't answer any further questions on the subject. Mitsuru tried to coax more out of him by suggesting he must have had a reputation in elementary school, but he only deemed it and denied it. "Any karate competition wins then?" That didn't work either. Later, Mitsuru learned that Kiriyama had been sneaking into the art class to work on a painting, as had happened on that day they met. When Mitsuru asked him why, he said, "I just felt like it." Mitsuru was drawn to Kiriyama, due in part to those mysteries. As an aside, the painting of you on the empty courtyard from the art room was a far better work than any of the sixth graders who would otherwise be expected to produce. Mitsuru never saw the painting, however, as Kiriyama tossed it into the wastebasket as soon as he had completed it. Mitsuru showed Kiriyama around the small town with the coffee shops where he and his friends hung out, the secret stash where he kept his stolen objects, the shady dealer of illicit goods, and so on. He was only a small fry, but he left nothing out that he knew. Kiriyama never gave a reaction, though he must have been interested enough to come along. Sometimes Kiriyama ran up against some of the older kids in school, aside from the ones he'd already beaten up, and some from one of the other junior high schools, and sometimes even high schoolers. Every time he laid them flat on the ground in a flash. Mitsuru was crazy about Kiriyama, elated like a trainer feels when a boxer he coaches becomes a champion. And then there was more to Kiriyama than that. He was smart, and he excelled at everything he did. When they did break in, like at a liquor store warehouse, he came up with and executed the brilliant plans. Kiriyama had gotten Mitsuru out of many a scrape. Since he and Kiriyama teamed up, he had never been brought or caught in by the police. Also, his father was supposedly the president of a major company within the prefecture, and the entire region of Chugoku and Shikoku combined. He was afraid of nothing. Mitsuru believed that some men were born to be kings, he thought. This man is destined for greatness, something more than I could ever imagine. Kiriyama was appointed the leader of their group. As they went around causing trouble, Mitsuru asked himself once, just once, if he was right to be involved. The single restrictions Kiriyama imposed on the gang was his own house, strictly speaking a mansion. He never allowed Mitsuru or the others inside. He had never said this straight out, but his demeanor made it understood. Mitsuru didn't know if Kiriyama's father was aware of what his son was up to, but either way, his delinquents wondered if he should be teaching his sheltered boy all of his bad behavior. After mulling it over, his voiced his concerns to Kiriyama. The boy only replied, "Whatever. It's interesting." Mitsuru decided to accept that. And so he and Kiriyama had been through a lot together, the king and his trusty advisor. As for his classmates, he wasn't sure, but he could never believe that Kiriyama and his family would kill each other, even in this desperate situation. That's precisely why Kiriyama had handed them notes. Mitsuru was certain Kiriyama had already figured out what they needed to do, and how to outwit the Sakamochi and escape. Once Kazuo and Kiriyama got started, the government wouldn't stand a chance. Such were Mitsuru's thoughts as he left school and headed south. Just once in the 25 minutes as he walked, he saw another person. The figure vanished into a cluster of houses to the southeast of the school. Mitsuru thought it might have been Yoji Kuramoto, boy number 8. Mitsuru was of course nervous. After all, he had seen Yoshio Akamatsu dead out front in the hall. Dead out in front of the school. The game had begun. Nothing had changed. Excuse me. Nothing had changed Mitsuru's plan. He hurried towards the meeting location. The others didn't matter a bit. He and his friends were escaping. As he moved further south, cover became more sparse, and he grew more tense, both in body and mind. Underneath the school uniform, he was drenched in cold sweat, and the beads of it ran from his short, permed hair down his forehead. A little ahead of the shoreline, curved right to the west. In the middle of the curve, a craggy outcropping jutted eastward from the mountain and submerged east to the sea. The jutted rock formation looked like the exposed spine of a buried dinosaur, or kaiju maybe. The rock stood far taller than Mitsuru and blocked his view of the other side. He glanced seaward, where across the dark, flat expanses, tiny lights indicated small islands and other land masses. Mitsuru was certain that he was on an island in the Seto Inland Sea. At least of that much he could be sure. He carefully surveyed the area before leaving the trees and stepping onto the island sand. Exposed in the moonlight, he walked toward the outcropping. Clinging to the steep rock face, he began to climb. The ascent was difficult. The rocks were cold and smooth, and the bags and the pistols he held got in the way. After some struggle, he reached the top of the rocks to find that the formation was only 3 meters wide, with sandy beach spreading out below on the meters. He stepped forward to begin the descent. Mitsuru. The voice came suddenly from behind, and Mitsuru nearly jumped. Reflexively, he turned and raised his gun. Then, with a sigh of relief, he lowered it. Kazuo Kiriyama was standing on the ledge in the shadow of a bulge of rock. With the relief in his voice, Mitsuru began, "Hey, boss!" Then he noticed the 3 lumps on the ground at Kiriyama's feet. Mitsuru squinted at the darkness. Then his eyes shot open wide. Those lumps were people. Ryuhei Sasagawa, boy number 10, was on his back, staring up at the sky. Hiroshi Kuranaga, boy number 9, was twisted on his side. He recognized them without a doubt. Like him, they were part of Kiriyama's family. The third was a girl in a sailor fuku. She was face down and couldn't be sure, but he thought she was Izumi Kanai, girl number 5. Beneath the 3 bodies was a pool of liquid. In the dark, the puddle was black, but Mitsuru knew that in the daylight it would be the same crimson color as on the flag of the Republic of the Great East Asia. Clueless of what had happened, Mitsuru began to tremble. What was... This is the southern point, Kiriyama said, looking up at Mitsuru beneath slick black hair, his eyes as calm as ever. He wore his school jacket on his shoulders, with his arms free of the sleeves, like a boxer draping in the robe of the end of the bout. What? Mitsuru said, the tremble of his chin transmitting into his voice. What? They... You mean them? Kiriyama thumped Ryuhei Sasagawa's body with the end of his plain, though high quality, leather-capped toe boot. Ryuhei's right arm swung from its resting place on his chest and traced a half-arm-length arc before splashing into the puddle, his pinky and ring finger disappearing into the liquid. They tried to kill me, Kiriyama explained. Kuranaga and Sasagawa too, so I killed them. It can't be! Mitsuru couldn't believe his ears. Hirogashi Kananawa was a nobody and just tagged along with their group, and he'd sworn an oath of loyalty to Kiriyama. Ryuhei had a lot of bravado and a violent streak. Sometimes Mitsuru had to go to a lot of trouble to keep him from kicking Yoshio Akamatsu's ass. But when the little brother got caught shoplifting, Kiriyama pulled some strings to deal with the police, and ever since Ryuhei had been extremely grateful. Those two would never have betrayed Kiriyama. Mitsuru sensed something sticky in the air. Blood. The stench of blood. Far from the smell of Yoshitoki's Konanobu's blood in the classroom, this was on an entirely different level. The difference was in the quantity. A full bucket's worth of blood had been splashed around. Overcome by the smell, Mitsuru's head shook up and down. That's right, he thought. You can't ever know what someone else is thinking. And maybe Kuranaga and Sasagawa thought they were going to be killed and went crazy, and that's how weak they were. They came here to the meeting place, but tried to surprise Kiriyama to take him out. Mitsuru's eyes were pinned to the other corpses. Now flat on her stomach, Izumi Kanai had been a pretty and petite girl. She was the daughter of a town councilman, though in a country with such an ultra centralized bureaucracy, the title was only honorary. And though she wasn't nearly in Kiriyama's league, if you counted off the wealthiest family in town on your fingers, you'd reach her family on one hand. But she never acted stuck up. Mitsuda himself, on occasion, thought she was cute. Of course, he knew better than to get hung up on a girl of her class. And now she's. Mitsuda somehow managed to speak. But, boss, Kanai, she's. Kiriyama's cold, dull eyes stared at him. Overwhelmed, Mitsuda, who tried to come up with an answer to his own question. She tried to kill you too, right? Kiriyama nodded. Kanai just happened to be here. Mitsuda's faith wavered, but he ultimately forced himself to believe that it wasn't impossible. It's what the boss said. Mitsuda blurted, "You don't have to worry about me. I'd never think of killing you, boss. This game can eat shit. We're going to take out Sakamochi and those soldiers, right? Let's do it. He knew that there was forbidden zones they couldn't approach the school. That's what Sakamochi had said, but Kiriyama would already have thought of a way around that. But Mitsuda stopped talking. He'd noticed Kiriyama shaking his head. Mitsuda's tongue had turned sticky, but he continued. Okay, all right, so we're escaping then. Great! Let's find a boat and... Kiriyama said, will you let me talk? And when Mitsuda stopped again, he continued. Either way would have been fine with me. That's what Mitsuda thought he heard, but he could only blink in response. He didn't understand what Kiriyama had said. He tried to read Kiriyama's eyes, but they were a calm twinkle in the shadow in his face. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the wrong person. I have to say it again. Will you let me talk? Either way would have been fine with me. What do you mean, either way? Kiriyama's neck stretched a little as his chin lifted to the night sky. The moon shone brightly, creating delicate shadows on his handsome face. In that pose, he continued, sometimes I lose track of what's right. Mitsuda was even more confused now, but he listened, an entirely different thought skimming across his mind, a sense that something was missing. He realized what it was now, who it was. With him here, and Sasagawa and Kuranaga on the ground, one of the family was missing. Sho Tsukikoka, boy number 14. He had left the school ahead of Mitsuda. Where is he? Of course he might have been frightened and was taking longer to get here. Or might he have been killed on the way? Whatever had happened, his absence felt like a bad omen. Kiriyama was saying, like now, I just don't know. The sight of Kiriyama talking on like this seemed strangely sad. Anyway, he said and turned to Mitsuda. He seemed to be talking faster, as if he'd reached an allegro mark in the score. When I came here, Kanai was already here. She tried to run away, and I kept her from escaping. Mitsuda swallowed. Then I flipped a coin. Heads, and I'd fight Sakamochi. And before Kiriyama had finished speaking, Mitsuda finally understood. No. He couldn't. He didn't want to believe it, and it shouldn't have been. Kiriyama was the king, and he was his trusty advisor. It was something to be his eternal loyalty and Kiriyama's grace. Take Kiriyama's slick back hair. Right about when Mitsuda's broken fingers had healed, he'd recommended the new hairstyle to Kiriyama and had him try it out. That's better, boss, he said. You look badass. And Kiriyama had never changed it. Maybe a hairstyle didn't amount to much, but to Mitsuru, it had been a symbol of their bond. But, Mitsuru now realized, what if he just thought it would be too much of a bother to change it? What if it had been too much on his mind to care about something like that? And it didn't stop there. All we did together, I believe, was just some kind of a sacred team spirit. What was it to him? A diversion? Just an experience? Not more of an experience, no feelings attached. Hadn't he said it himself? It's interesting. From the depths of his mind, an old doubt came back to life. He had thought it unimportant and left it gathering dust in some corner of himself. He had never seen Kazuo Kiriyama smile. Mitsuda's next thoughts drew closer to the corner of the truth. He'd always seen like he had a lot on his mind, and I think that's true, but down in his heart, is there a darkness deeper than I can imagine? No, not a sadness, but nothing, just an empty space. Maybe Sho Tsukikoka sensed it. Mitsuru had no more time to think. He focused on all of his thoughts. On the trigger finger. That's the one that had been broken. On the lowered Walter PPK. The sea breeze blew in, stirring up the smell of the pool of blood, mixing with it. The sound of crashing waves carried on. Extended from his hand, the nose of the PPK shook, but Kiriyama was already throwing back his jacket. There was a faintly pleasant sound. the sound of 950 rounds firing per minute, though of an altogether different nature, resembling the clacking of an old mechanical typewriter in an antique store. Izumi Kanai, Sasagawa, and Kirananaga had all been stabbed. For the first time since the game's opening, gunfire echoed across the island. Mitsuru was still standing, though he couldn't see them through his clothes. He had 4 finger-sized holes running from his stomach to his chest. Whatever the reason, only 2 holes came out his back, each wide enough to fit a tin can through. The Walther PPK wavered at his side, his eyes staring off towards the North Star, though on such a brightly moonlit night he probably couldn't see it. Kuriyama was holding a crude hunk of metal that looked like a small gift, with a grin slapping on. A grip slapped on an Ingram Mac 10. He said, "Tails, I'd play the game." As if he had been waiting on those words, Mitsuru tipped over forward. When he fell, his head bashed against a rock and bounced back 5 centimeters. Kazuo Kiriyama remained seated for a time. Then he abruptly stood, walked over to Mitsuru Namai's corpse, and touched the fingertips of his left hand to the bullet-ridden body as if he were checking for something. This was no emotional response. He wasn't feeling anything. No pangs of conscience, no remorse, no sympathy. He just wanted to know what happened to the human body when penetrated by bullets. Actually, it wasn't that he wanted to know, just that knowing it wouldn't be bad. Before long, he withdrew his hand and touched it. To his left temples, to be precise, a little behind it. To anyone who didn't know, he might have appeared to be straightening his slick-backed hair. But that wasn't what he was doing. He had a strange sensation, not pain, not an itch, but a peculiar feeling that came to him only rarely, not more than a few times a year, drawing his hand reflectively to that spot. That sensation, along with the feeling of his fingertips touching there, had become deeply familiar to Kiriyama. Though he knew a great many things about the world due to the thorough and exceptional education provided to him by his parents, what Kiriyama didn't know was what caused that sensation. But how could he? By the time he was old enough to look in the mirror, the wound scar had almost completely healed. The rest of the story remained in the distant past. The freak accident that had caused the wound and nearly killed him in the womb, his mother's immediate death. With less than a month to his due date, the consultation between his father and the famous doctor over the shard that had pierced his skull, the fact that, unbeknownst to both his father and the doctor who bragged about his flawless operation, that the shard that had gouged out the most minute cluster of nerve cells. The surgeon died of liver failure soon after, and his father, his biological father that is, passed away under complex circumstances. By now, none were left who could tell Kiriyama the whole story. But one thing was clear, though to Kiriyama it was just the natural way of things, and even if he never consciously acknowledged it, and may have even lacked the ability to acknowledge it, this is what he came to. He, Kazuo Kiriyama, standing in front of the 4 corpses, including that of Mitsuru Numai, had no reason to feel any pains of conscience, any remorse, any sympathy, or any emotion at all. From the day he came into this world, he had never experienced anything resembling that emotion. That of any emotion. 34 students remain. And I think that's enough of that. Alright, so that's chapter 12 we're going to end on for now. Because I'm tired. My eyes keep, closing. Shit. Alright, so that's that. Alright, yeah. Alright, so that's that. Yeah, I didn't, do anything, so, like I said, I do these streams just so I can force myself to read and, try to get good with my dyslexic self. And, if anybody enjoys listening to the story, then yay. I know my voice is garbage, and I'm sorry about it, but, it is what it is. Don't look at my eyes. Alright, anybody who does listen, have a good night. Love yous.